Okay, well, welcome. My name is Kimberly Quinlan, and this is a special edition of your Anxiety Toolkit podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Dustin Weissman, and the title of today's podcast is going to be speaking about the mindful use of technology, which is such an important topic right now, I think, given that technology is so widely available. But also in that there are so many mental health apps out there that are out there to help. But my goal for today was really to talk about how we can have some moderation and use technology in the most mindful way possible. So let me sort of review quickly some of the topics that I want to go over today with Dr. Weissman. I particularly get asked in sessions with clients about whether social media is helping or hindering self-esteem, how to create a balanced lifestyle around it. Is there a way to moderate it without it being affecting the parent-child relationship? And most important for those who have OCD is how to moderate the compulsive use of technology. So welcome, Dr. Weissman.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Is there any delay there? Do you hear?
Yeah, it's getting a little choppy.
Okay, I'm doing well on my end, so hopefully it stays clear enough. So Dr. Weissman is considered an expert in screen time. And I'm going to read off my notes here. Earlier this year, he published his dissertation titled Impacts of Playing Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Games on Individuals' Subjective Sense of Feeling Connected with Others. So can you tell me what that means and what you found?
Yeah, so I looked at the relationship between how much time people were spending gaming online and how it affected not how they were doing socially, but how they thought they were doing socially. And for the most part, it was actually good. People that were involved online felt they were more connected. There was one caveat that we found where if people were spending time looking for squad engagement, which is a small group of members doing the same task or quest, if they found that extra important to them, then the more they played, the more lonely they felt. So that was the only little interesting thing, that people that really valued that felt lonelier. It seemed like they wanted to reach a social connection, and because it was so important for them, it was probably their only way of finding a social connection, and that way they felt isolated from the rest of the world.
Right.
But for other people that just enjoyed the playing, it wasn't as big of a problem because they had other social connections in their life.
Interesting, which I think is true when we start to talk about one of the topics I wanted to talk with you about is self-esteem. Is if you're using media to boost your self-esteem, that's probably similar. You would get similar results, would you say?
Yeah, so like if you're using Facebook and you're waiting for, how many likes you get, how many comments you get on a certain post, if you get a small amount and that's something that's very important to you, it's probably going to hit you a lot harder rather than somebody who just posts to share their life and they don't care as much about how many likes or posts they get or comments they get.
Right. Whereas if you were posting just for the sake of sending information or a photo of your breakfast, let's say, if you were posting for the sake of just sharing, it wouldn't be so affected. Interesting, right.
Yeah.
And that lines up very much with an OCD, sort of a compulsive behavior, which is if you're trying to get a solution, now all the odds are out on other people to control that. What are your thoughts on how people can moderate that or work with that?
Well, yeah, with OCD, you're looking at a lot of control. So the way you're presenting it is that if you're putting it out there to the world and you're hoping that they give it back, you're giving the world complete control over that post.
Right.
And somebody who does struggle with OCD is going to have a hard time, I'd imagine, with having that out in the world and not being able to control it on their own.
Right, right, absolutely. Okay, that's so fascinating that the studies showed that in general, you would say, particularly when you were looking at these multi-game playing, this kind of format, that people were feeling connected
Mm.
though.
Yeah. The biggest factors that came out were age and student status. Those were the ones that really correlated with the data that we were using, this 3 clinical scales, the compulsive internet use scale, the UCLA loneliness scale, and the video game addiction test.
Interesting.
So within those, it was age and student status. Because they had more time, it was much more common for this demographic that it was more acceptable. And they started out kind of lower. They had a lower threshold. They had more room, that they had ability to play.
Right.
But then once they passed a certain amount of hours online, then it spiked in terms of clinical problems.
Right.
That they can, yeah, it goes a lot faster. The exponential growth is much quicker than if you're older.
Right. And what would be the classification of having like an internet addiction? Like how would you diagnose that, or what would be the criteria?
Well, that was one of the things that was proposed for the DSM-5 that didn't quite make it in yet, but it's one of the ones on the cusp. So in terms of actually diagnosing it, I wouldn't suggest that. I think it might be other issues, more of a tendency. So I like the term compulsive internet use or problematic internet use. The compulsive relates to the checking. Always checking your phone for updates and seeing if somebody's liked your post and all of that. So if that's interfering with your life and your work and your school, whatever it may be, that's where I'd say you have a problem. I wouldn't necessarily diagnose you with the disorder, but I'd say this is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Interesting. See, you're educating me, because I didn't realize that it was being challenged for the DSM-5, and you're thinking that it will be, in the next one?
I don't know. I think that its awareness has improved, and they have some classifications in there that are, for consideration. I think it's more the online gaming factors that they've put in there.
Right.
And yeah,
Right.
we'll see what happens in the DSM-5 TR.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So if we were to talk about self-esteem, right, which I think is hard, because if I'm in the office, the adolescent will come and say, it helps my self-esteem. The parents will report a significant issue with self-esteem following the social media, time. Let's say after school they're allowed to have 10, 15 minutes. The parents report that they are noticing a reduction. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of what you see in private practice and from your research?
In terms of how their self-esteem relates to their use?
Right. Well, why would the kid report that it's helping? Do you think that's more that they're afraid the parents will just take their phone away? Or is that what you think is going on? Or
Yeah, well, the consensus I hear from a lot of adolescents is that they feel connected. It's all about being in and connected. And this is not a new concept for high school or middle school. That everybody wants to fit in. And this is social media today, whether it's any one of the various platforms, whichever one it is, they all feel connected to their friends. And their thought is, if you take away my phone or my social media, then I'm no longer connected with them. And the idea of just going to their house or giving them a phone call is foreign. It's so much of communication is now done on social media. If they want to send a message to somebody, it's a lot more likely to happen on Snapchat than it is with a text message or a phone call. Right. So if you told somebody, hey, why don't you just go to your friend's house and connect with them that way? It would be like saying, why don't you go to Mars and talk to them over there, to an adolescent?
Do you think that that's
So that's why it's so important for them to connect with their friends after school for 15 minutes or however long. If you let them do it nonstop, they'll do that too.
right? And that's what I was going to ask. Do you think that we will, because that we're connecting more on social media? I know a question that I've seen asked in more news media is, do you think that will increase reduction of social strength or an increase in social anxiety?
I think it'd be more of a shift that we're not going to be communicating as much face to face, and we'll do it more on the online platform. I don't like that. I think that we should be promoting better interaction and social skills amongst children and adolescents.
Right, right.
So it's an unfortunate transition that I hope will change, and I hope that parents recognize if their kids aren't relating well. And there's lots of support groups for that, and social skills groups, and different clubs and organizations kids can get involved in, and adults too.
Right. Well, that's interesting because I think back to when I was a teen, your really only way of connecting was if you picked up the landline phone, which makes me sound so old.
Mhm.
Or sports. Sports were a really big way of that was your afternoon activity, and that required you to really connect more, which of course has its own set of problems in terms of self-esteem and as well. So what would you, I'm skipping over some things that I wanted to go, but what would you recommend for a parent? How would you recommend they set aside rules with technology?
I like how you point out the sports and the engagement, because that's what I would recommend. Getting your kids involved, giving them stuff to do where they're not just sitting there with the electronic pacifier or electronic babysitter that is going to just suck them in. It's very important for kids to have dynamic lives. The more engaged they are and the more active they are, the less time they have to think about, what did people think about my picture of my breakfast this morning, or whatever they posted earlier on social media. It won't be as important because they'll be focused on whatever else is going on in their lives. So if they're engaged in, let's say, a youth group and they have a leadership position, they'll be more focused on doing something for that than they will. I mean, they might be using social media for it, but at least it'll be working towards something and in collaboration with others.
Right, right. And so if as a parent, you're a parent, I'm a parent, our kids know each other, how do you set
Yep.
rules?
So the rule for my family is the kids get 1 hour of electronics per day. And the first thing to go when they're misbehaving is electronics the next day. And by electronics, I mean screen time.
Right.
So they get 1 hour of screen time on a cell phone, or it would be our cell phones, the parents, or a tablet, or the TV. We'll make an exception sometimes if they're watching a movie, because movies go over an hour. But yeah, the first thing to go is electronics.
Right.
So that's kind of the rule in the house here.
Very good. And I agree with that entirely. And I think that's a really good boundary setting and rule. Like once you've set the rule, everybody knows it. What would happen,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a question I get asked often by parents is, well, let's say they've had the phone taken off them. What do you do, or what's your advice for the kid who now has to do homework on some type of device?
Yeah, so that's a tricky situation because a lot of schools, especially in our district, they hand out computers for homework. And my daughter has to do her, she has an app she's supposed to download to do reading and math on. So we've told her that if she loses electronics, she doesn't get to do that assignment.
Wow.
She can do a different day that week, but not that day. So if the schools later, if there's a problem with that, then that's something that needs to be addressed with the administration or the teacher. I do know of a parent that I worked with or talked to about their kid they're actually in a fight with the school district because of this particular issue. They don't want their kid using not social media, but their electronic device sometimes. Like if they take away the tech, they take it away, regardless of if they need to use it for homework. So I think it's important that if schools are going to be assigning this mandatory use of screen, that they also provide an alternative.
Right.
They shouldn't rid the world of textbooks. I find
Right.
that textbooks are still more effective than computer textbooks on a computer.
Right. Such a difficult conversation for parents to have. And it's a really common question in like, well, I set a rule, but I have to be consistent, otherwise there's no real point. So that's really, really good advice. Excellent. So then, all right, so that's how we would do it with kids. A bigger issue is how do we apply the rules to us? Um, because as adults, we tend to forget to set rules. I
Mm-hmm.
actually only, I just was listening to Brendan Burchard, who was talking about this new sort of rule of no media, no social media, no technology for the first 50 minutes of the day or the last 50 minutes of the day. And I practiced that, and it blew my mind how huge a shift that is to the beginning and end of my day. What are your recommendations for people, when it applies to the adult who has the iPhone, the iPad, the laptop, whatever other, sometimes an Apple Watch or a Fitbit? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think the first 15 minutes a day, if you can do it, would be fantastic. The end of the day is a little easier, I think, in that I recommend an hour of no cell phone use before bed if you have sleeping problems. If you don't have sleeping problems, then yeah, 15 minutes is probably sufficient because of the way that cell phones interact with our neural connections.
Right.
They just have a way, and there's lots of research on this, and the little blue screen, and that it activates your brain, it excites your brain a lot more. So it's harder for your brain to get down to those theta waves, the deep sleep waves when you're trying to go to sleep when it's been stimulated.
Right. Right.
So for that last point, earlier you're talking about how do we measure that? How do we control it? I'll tell you what I've been doing is I recently downloaded an app called Quality Time, and this app it regulates when I unlock my screen, how long I'm on it for the day, when I'm using it, which apps I'm on. It gives a lot of data. And there's a lot of apps like this. So
And
I started
Dr.
out
Watts
between three and
Weissman,
4 hours a day on my phone.
sorry,
Yeah,
I think it broke up a little bit. It's called Quality Time.
sorry. Quality Time, yeah, and just one of many apps. There's a lot of applications that you can download for whichever device you have that will monitor how long you're using it. And every time it's always there. It's kind of this running stream, and I get an update from the day before how much time I was on my phone, and how many times I unlocked my screen. So it's
Interesting.
baffling to see that.
I would be frightened to know what the answer would be, right? If on
Well, I
mine.
use my phone a lot for work too, so it's a matter. It's really interesting to see how many times we unlock our phone throughout the day. That's what's really interesting.
Interesting.
With adolescents, I'm sure you'd see, probably 12 hours a day of screen time use, and you can see which apps are being used most.
Right.
And then a recommendation I have for this is schedule your checking time, especially if we're going to draw it back to compulsive and checking behaviors. Schedule time to check.
Right.
And then to help this, disable notifications, especially on social media. You're going to check it anyway, so why not check it at a certain time, not every time that it beeps or buzzes? You don't have to go to your phone and see what it was instantaneously. It's okay. No one's going to get upset if you didn't comment back or read a comment right after it was posted. The world will move on. And I imagine that you don't expect the same of your friends and family.
Interesting. Okay, so I never even thought of that, and which is so true of, we've just had quite a very difficult week with the mass shooting in Vegas, and I have been giving
Mm-hmm.
advice to people, and I'm noticing on my phone that the news, all the different news carriers just keep blasting my phone with updates, which is quite concerning when you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden, seven different messages come through. So that's a really good point. I had never thought of that. So turn off the notifications. There's several apps you're
Mm-hmm.
saying that will help basically log your time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
and how else do
And a
you
lot of it,
go ahead?
I was going to say that a lot of it's being mindful of your use. So the more aware of it you are, the more you can address it. Just like you were talking about, and I think it was episode 14 on patience. And you're talking about being aware of your surroundings and being in the moment. And I think that was really powerful and in line with this of you don't have to be disrupted by it. Just be where you are and be aware of what you're doing. If you're on your phone, be aware that you're checking. Snap out of it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
For me, and this is something I had to related to that, is I notice that when I have a moment of just stillness and I've been running all day, that the stillness feels uncomfortable. And my first default is to pick up my phone. It's almost like an attempt to not be in my body, and not connect, not
Mm-hmm.
ground myself. It's like I've been running, I'm going to this client, I ran to the bathroom, I have 3 minutes. It's uncomfortable to slow down, and so I pick up my phone. And then it was more for me. It was my mindful like practice was, you're running away from your discomfort. Like stay, right? You're trying to stay out of your physical, your whatever you're feeling. And I think that inquiry allowed me to slow down, just sort of that mindless checking.
Yeah. And
Right,
it's also a compulsion. We compulsively check our phones.
right, right.
So yeah, it's hard. It's also, it gives us that little dopamine hit. Every time you check it and there's an alert or an update and you get a notification of something happened. It's just a little dopamine hit each time, and that's what keeps drawing you back in.
Right, right.
So taking off those notifications, you don't have to worry about it as much.
It's true. It's true. Several of my clients have really struggled with checking because of the fear that a catastrophe will happen, right? Like sort of checking their phone
Hmm.
to make sure the daycare hasn't called, or the school hasn't called, or even they're checking to take away the uncertainty of that massive terror attack or an earthquake. Would you suggest that's just the same practice in terms of sitting with your uncertainty and tolerating your discomfort, or what do you have any special tools that you use for managing that uncertainty?
I mean, the primary function of the phone is to receive a phone call. So if you get a phone call, you'll probably know it. And if they can't reach you at one place, then they usually have a second number they can call and an emergency contact. So as long as you're aware that whatever happens, the primary person who's taking care of your kids or whoever may be, that's their responsibility. You're entrusting them to do that job. And when you go there, the time that you go there, they'll be there. They'll be safe.
Mm.
And if they're not safe, they'll be taken care of to getting them back to safety.
Right.
There's usually not much you can do in that type of situation. For example, the recent shooting. Let's say you had a friend that was there and they were, or a relative, and you learned about that they were there, and maybe they were injured, and you can't do anything from where you are. Let's say you're in California and they're in Las Vegas. There's nothing that you can do in that moment because they're probably getting the first aid treatment and
Mm.
emergency care that they need to the best of the ability of whoever's there.
Right.
You getting out there, you're not gonna get there any quicker than probably 3 hours. So when you find out, yes, you can go and let the situation stabilize. Uh, but you knowing about it in that instant isn't necessarily going to give you power to change the situation.
Right, right. And I actually podcasted about that exact thing on Monday evening after the shooting, which is the knowing doesn't help in many cases. The
Yeah.
knowing of the disaster, knowing every detail of the disaster doesn't help them or us either. And so it's sort of, this is where I often will talk with my clients with anxiety is we have to really accept it is what it is. And usually when I say it is what it is, there is a strong reactivity to that because it's like, no,
Mm.
it can't be that way. But sometimes it is. And I'm not specifically talking about the shooting, but, you know, things are the way they are. And we do have to just allow that truth to be there instead of refusing the reality.
Yeah,
Right.
and we have to remember that anxiety is a good thing in certain situations. Anxiety is there to help us to act, to get things done, For example, if you have a bill that's due and you don't have money to pay it, you're going to feel anxious. And that anxiety is going to fuel you to find a way to pay that bill so that your lights stay on, or that your water's running, or that you have a roof over your head. So in a lot of ways, anxiety is a good thing. And I think that we forget that.
We just move into how can I squash it?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so they're awesome. I love those tools. And maybe if you would you send me the links to the different apps, and I will load them into the show notes so that people can use those, because I think I actually need to apply that to my own practice. That's why I love this. I
Yeah.
get to take a tool for myself. So we've talked about mindful practice of technology. Do you have any other advice for people who have anxiety on how to manage technology in general? Anything we may have missed?
One thing I want to add is that if you're listening to this and you have a good app, comment on the box below and let everybody else know what's working for you. Or if you've used an app that you didn't like, let them know.
Right.
With tech use, there are apps also for mindfulness and guided visualization and calming apps. So all you have to do is punch into whichever store you're going to use one of those keywords: calming app, mindfulness app, phone data app, regulation app, something along those lines. I imagine you're all pretty smart out there, and you can come up with a keyword to get what you want. They make it very simple for you to find those things.
Right. A lot of my clients
then,
love Headspace for that. It's a meditation app, which, I find has helped so many people with their mindfulness practice. So, I mean, again, it's another example of where the technology will push us towards positive behaviors, but we also have to regulate it. Everything has a sharp side, I guess, is the main concept here. Right?
Yeah, and the takeaway point is, if you're struggling if this is a hard thing for you to manage your time online and you're checking too much, one thing is increasing your mindfulness about it. Be aware of it. You can't do anything until you're aware there's a problem.
Right.
So once you're aware that you're doing it a lot, then you can make target goals for yourself. You don't have to, as you say, squash it. It doesn't have to go away. We have to. I mean, today's world, a smartphone is involved, and that's fine. It's just a matter of, is it interfering with the rest of your life?
Right.
So take some time for yourself and be aware of how much time you're using, and maybe setting the goal of, I'm at 8 hours a day. I want to get down to 4 hours a day, and then appropriate steps.
Right. I've become I've been practicing this tool, which isn't related to technology, but of constantly checking my intentions for things. So as I go into the office, I take a second, I pause, and I ask, what's my intention today? And only recently have I started to say, okay, I'm going to work on either staying present, or I'm not going to use the phone, right, as the go-to, or I'm going in the breaks. We're not checking email, because email is mostly people just wanting stuff from me, right? Which is fine. That's the medium, but it's like, no, that's not grounding me in any way. So it's sort of setting that intention sometimes means that my results are better. Right? Then, I think it's a constant thing we have to remind ourselves. But the app might be actually what did you say the name of the app was?
Quality time.
Quality time. Perfect. One other thought in terms of the use of phones is a lot of my body dysmorphic disorder clients and eating disorder clients use it as reassurance of when using the camera. Of course, this is highly problematic. But do you have, what is your thoughts, or do you have any kind of background or understanding of advice for people who are using it in that form?
So you're talking about more
using
like
the camera.
selfies?
Yeah, using the camera, whether it be checking for thinness, checking for fatness, checking for imperfections.
I don't know if I want to comment specifically on just using the camera for themselves. It's if they're posting it and looking at what other people think, then that is where there might be a disconnect. It's more important to, what feels comfortable. And with dysmorphic disorder, it's difficult because you find all the flaws that people don't think are flaws. So social media can be very affirming or it can be very mean, depending on what it is that you post and what they perceive it to be. So if you post a picture of something that you think is horrible and nobody else sees that, you might get a lot of positive feedback that, no, you're crazy, this isn't there, I don't see what you're seeing, and think, okay, would that give me what I'm wanting from this picture?
Right.
Chances are not.
Right.
Usually if somebody's posting something about something that they feel is not right, they're looking for a confirmation from somebody else.
Right.
So if they get one post that says, wow, you're so right, that's completely horrible, and everybody else says that's great, that one post that aligns with their thought is just going to strengthen the dysmorphic thought.
Right. I think they said for every 17 compliments, it only takes one criticism to tear it down.
I would believe that. I haven't heard that, but yeah, very
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
I could probably do 1 out of 100.
Right. Right. No, I just read that not long ago, and I thought that was an interesting scientific statistic. I agree with you. And I think for people with BDD, I've even heard a lot of them say the presence of positive social media comments can be as problematic as the negative ones, because if someone were to say, oh, your hair looks great today, they start to do a mental rumination on, well, what was wrong with my hair yesterday? Did I look ridiculous yesterday? And so this is where I often will give a flat rule with clients of like, no more. If you've got body dysmorphic disorder around a certain part of your body, I don't, for the short term, I don't want you posting, right? Because that's always going to end up as a compulsion, and it's always going to end up as a turned into a mental rumination about what that means and for the future and the past. So that's just something to think about for people who have eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorder. Very cool. And so going back, I know we're looping all the way back to the beginning, is what would you suggest to help build self-esteem, so that people aren't, like you had mentioned at the beginning, the people in gaming who were looking for it as a form of, boost. What would you suggest for those people who are left feeling quite desperate and have been using the phones compulsively?
I would encourage completion of real world tasks, whether it's doing a project, getting involved in something, real world accomplishment, something that you can do that's tangible, makes a difference in your life or somebody else's life. Those are the achievements you want to pursue. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be that you feel lacking in life, so you're going to go and seek this confirmation from social media. If you're feeling that way, then the best thing I could recommend is seeking something in the real world that would be rewarding and fulfilling for you.
Right. Excellent. Very good. Well, Dustin, is there anything that I haven't asked you or you think is super important to mention before we finish up?
Nah, I think we've covered a lot of it. One last thing, actually, no. For children under the age of 3, we didn't talk about them. I would recommend, and a lot of the research now is saying, do not let them have any screen time. There's a lot of devices for them. There's even the iPotty or whatever it is, where they have the stand for a tablet on the potty. I would highly discourage these. The research is showing it's bad for neural development for children under the age of 3 to be immersed in screens. I know it's so easy to just put them in front of a screen as a babysitter or a pacifier, but that's the thing that they need the least at in the first 5, but especially the first 3. Right. That's where it's really critical to keep them away from screens to the best of your ability. Having noise in the background is fine, like a TV on. I had that with my kids, and it just gets them used to loud noises, so they don't get startled when there is. But it's when they're sitting in front of a tablet or a cell phone, and that's what's occupying their field of vision. Right. It's too stimulating, and it does impair the growth of some neurons.
Right. And I see that in my kids. There is this. It looks so difficult for them to transition if they are in front of a screen. and I
Hmm.
turn it off, it almost looks painful for them to transition into individual play or playing with each other.
Yeah.
They seem confused and so tunneled in. It's
Hmm.
visible. I can visibly see. And so again, that's what makes me think, like, as a adult, that has to be happening with me as well. Can you imagine if I held my phone, it's so small, and then to have to go out into the big world, that the transition
Yeah.
there is really difficult.
Yeah. Imagine a 32-inch screen TV in front of your face throughout the day. It's probably not going to be a good thing.
It's
And
true.
when we were younger, even maybe our parents, they were when the TV was really early. I think they were told that if you stand too close to the TV, then what was you'll go blind or something along those lines.
We were told you'd get square eyes.
Yeah, square eyes. Yeah, so we make up lies to protect our children, and now instead of us sitting in front of TVs, now it's our kids sitting in front of iPads and iPhones.
Right. We should tell them they'll get rectangle eyes.
Did it work for us?
No. Well, they'll get
So it's
widescreen
on the
eyes.
parents to not put them there in the first place.
Right.
That's what I think it is.
Right.
And I'm
Right.
not blaming any parents out there. I've done this too.
Mm.
I'm guilty of it as well. It's so easy. And it's just a matter of being aware.
Right.
The mindfulness, being aware of what you're doing and be aware of it for your kids because they'll be so much better off
Right.
if they engage in physical play, not online or interactive play with technology.
Right.
Screen time specifically. Technology is fine. The interactive toys with the sounds and the lights, those are okay. But try to limit the screen time to 0 for the first 3 years.
Right. Good. It's good to know
I know I'm
that.
asking a miracle here, but if I had known the research now, when my kids were within the first 3, I would have tried a lot harder to keep them from screens.
Right. The hard thing is I was so good with my first, and the second I just let everything go, and I have to manage my own guilt about that. Right, right. Well, this has been so helpful. I think the main message here is these are guidelines. No one is to
Yes.
feel guilty or ashamed if they're
Mhm.
unable to follow them. It's like healthy eating and exercise. You just do the best you can. But I think, hopefully there's been some good information here that can help you have a better relationship with your devices in the
Mhm.
future. So thank you so much, Dr. Weissman.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly, for having me.
Tell me a little bit of where people can hear about you or find more information about you.
Well, you can go to my website, dustinweissman.com. It's just a personal website. I post occasional blogs up there. Also links to my other interviews, my dissertation. You can find a link on the homepage. So it's just my name, and I think it'll be on the title of this podcast. And yeah, I'm in some private practice in Westlake Village. So
In
that's where you
California.
can find me. Yes, in
Fantastic.
California.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll add those links to the show notes if anyone wants to contact Dr. Weissman. And thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please note that this is a podcast that shouldn't be used for mental health care. If you feel you would benefit by mental professional health care, please reach out to a provider in your area. This is to be used for psychoeducation purposes only. Have a great day.